The Veth'kai don't waste bullets on human prisoners. They let the cold do it instead. Sergeant Elias Vance had been counting the frost patterns on the cell wall for 11 days when they threw the alien girl in with him. She hit the frozen floor hard, a bundle of thin limbs and torn gray cloth, and didn't move for a long moment. When she finally lifted her head, Elias saw eyes that glowed faintly amber in the darkness. Too large for her narrow face, too bright for someone in chains. "Wrong cell," he said flatly, not moving from his corner. "The Veth'kai officers are 3 levels up. This is where they keep the things they want to forget about." She pushed herself up slowly, chains clinking. They'd given her the heavy kind, the ones designed for species stronger than humans. On her thin wrists, they looked almost comical. "Almost. I know where I am." Her voice was surprisingly steady, accented but clear. "You are Sergeant Elias Vance, 3rd Human Expeditionary Force, captured at the siege of Kolveth." Elias went still. "You have good intel for a prisoner. I am not a prisoner." She managed to sit upright, and he noticed then how she held herself, spine straight despite the cold chin level, despite the bruises blooming across her cheekbone. "I am Seri'ven Kael. I am being made an example." The name meant nothing to him. He'd been rotting in the cell for nearly 2 weeks. Galactic politics felt very far away. Example of what? Those amber eyes fixed on him. Of what happens when a Vel'kari heir refuses to surrender her systems to Veth'kai occupation. Elias stared at her. The Vel'kari were one of the minor powers in this sector. 7 systems, modest fleet, known for their diplomats rather than their warriors. He'd heard rumors that they'd been crushed early in the war, their leadership scattered or dead. "You're royalty," he said slowly. "I am the last of my bloodline." She said it simply without drama. "My mother surrendered. My brothers were executed. I refused to kneel, so they put me here." A pause. "With you? Lucky you, yes." She looked around the cell, at the frost, the bare stone, the single grate in the ceiling that let in a trickle of gray light. "They told me you have killed 47 Veth'kai soldiers in ground combat. They told me you are the reason their General Kethfor walks with a limp." Those 2 bright eyes returned to him. "They told me you would probably kill me before the cold did." Elias laughed. It came out rusty. He hadn't used the muscles in a while. "And you're not worried? Should I be?" He studied her. This slip of an alien girl, barely reaching his chest, shivering in chains 3 sizes too large. A princess playing at being brave or something else entirely. "No," he finally said. "I don't kill cellmates. Bad luck." She nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she already knew. Then she looked at him with unsettling directness. "Will you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to kill 47 Veth'kai soldiers." Her voice didn't waver. "When we escape, I will need to know." Elias had been a soldier for 15 years. He'd seen courage and foolishness, hope and desperation. He'd watched men break and men endure. But he'd never seen anything quite like the calm certainty in this girl's eyes, as if escape wasn't a possibility but an inevitability, and the only question was what she would do afterward. "When we escape," he repeated. "Yes, we're 200 meters underground in a Veth'kai prison fortress. I'm half-starved and you weigh about as much as my field pack. The guards rotate every 4 hours, and the only way out is through 16 checkpoints and a blast door that requires 3 biometric signatures." She listened to all of this without expression. Then, "I know. I memorized the layout on the way down. The rotation is actually every 3 hours and 40 minutes. They have a shift overlap protocol. And the blast door only requires 2 signatures if you trigger the fire suppression system first." Elias stared at her. "I have been planning escape since I was 6 years old," Seri'ven said quietly. "My tutors called it a morbid hobby. My mother called it paranoia." Something flickered across her face, there and gone. She was wrong. The cold seemed less oppressive suddenly, or maybe Elias had just stopped noticing it. "You're serious," he said. "I am always serious, Sergeant Vance." She shifted, chains scraping stone, and he saw her wince, a tiny crack in the composure. She was hurt more than she was showing. "Of course she was. But I cannot do it alone. I know tactics in theory. You know them in blood." I need. She stopped, and for the first time, something uncertain crossed her face. I need someone to show me how to be more than what I was raised to be. And what were you raised to be? A symbol. The word came out bitter. A face on currency. A signature on treaties. Someone who smiled and waved and never, ever got her hands dirty. She held up her chained wrists, and he saw then what he'd missed. The blisters, the raw skin, the evidence of struggle. I am finding I preferred dirt. Elias should have dismissed her. He'd survived this long by not caring about anything beyond his own skin. He'd watched squad mates die, watched worlds burn, watched every cause he'd ever believed in crumble to ash. He was tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. But something about her, the certainty, maybe, or the fear she was trying so hard to hide beneath it, reminded him of someone he'd been once. A long time ago. First lesson, he said, and her head snapped up, eyes bright. Hope is a liability. Don't hope we'll escape. Plan for it. Hope gets you killed. Planning keeps you alive. I understand. No, you don't. Not yet. He shifted, his own joints protesting, and held out his hand. But you will. Now come here and let me look at those ribs before you puncture a lung trying to pretend you're fine. She hesitated, just a moment, and then she crawled across the frozen floor to him. Up close, she smelled like blood and engine oil, and something faintly sweet, like crushed flowers. Up close, he could see how young she really was. Too young for chains. Too young for any of this. Why are you helping me? She asked as he probed carefully at her side, feeling for breaks. Because I'm bored, he said. And because you're the first interesting thing that's happened in 11 days. It wasn't the truth. The truth was more complicated, more dangerous. The truth was that for the first time in years, Elias Vance had met someone who looked at impossible odds and saw a puzzle instead of a death sentence. The truth was that he'd forgotten what hope felt like, and this strange alien girl was reminding him. But he wasn't ready to admit that yet. Maybe not ever. 2 broken ribs, he said instead. We'll bind them with strips from my jacket. Don't move suddenly, don't breathe too deep, and for God's sake, don't try to look brave. Pain is information. Use it. Yes, Sergeant. Elias. If we're going to die together, you might as well use my name. Something shifted in her face. A crack in the royal mask. A glimpse of the frightened girl beneath. But her voice was steady when she spoke. Siri, my brothers called me Siri. He didn't ask about her brothers. He already knew. All right, Siri. He started tearing strips from his jacket sleeve, fingers numb with cold but steady from years of field medicine. Lesson 2. Pain is temporary. Weakness is fatal. Remember that. She watched him work with those unsettling amber eyes, and despite everything, the cold, the chains, the impossible odds, he saw her not. I will remember, she said. And somehow, he believed her. They took Elias on the 5th day after Siri's arrival. He came back 6 hours later, dumped through the cell door like garbage. Siri scrambled to him immediately, her healing ribs screaming in protest, and found him breathing but barely conscious. His face was a ruin of bruises, and his hands, your fingers, she whispered, still attached. His voice was a rasp. Disappointed them. She helped him to the corner they'd claimed as theirs, the one where their combined body heat created a pocket of slightly less freezing air. He slumped against the wall, eyes closed, and she did what he'd taught her. Assessed the damage clinically, without flinching. 2 dislocated fingers. Burns on his forearms. Something wrong with his left knee. Dozens of cuts and bruises. But nothing fatal. Nothing permanent. They wanted intelligence, he said without opening his eyes. Troop positions. Command codes. The usual. What did you tell them? Everything I know about human cooking shows. They were very confused. Siri found herself laughing, a strange, rusty sound that surprised them both. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. That is either very brave or very stupid. In my experience, they're usually the same thing. He finally opened his eyes, and despite everything, there was a glint of dark humor there. Your turn next. Probably. They'll want to know about Vel'kari fleet positions, defense protocols, anything your government kept secret. My government is dead. They don't know that. Or they don't care. He shifted, wincing. When they come for you, remember what I told you. Give them something real enough to verify, useless enough to matter. Buy time. Stay alive. Seri nodded slowly. They'd spent days talking in low voices, planning between the guards' rounds. She'd told him everything she knew about the prison's layout. He'd told her everything he knew about Veth'kai psychology. They'd sketched escape routes with frozen fingers on frost-covered stone, erasing them before each inspection. But they'd also talked about other things. His homeworld, a place called Montana, full of mountains and silence. Her childhood palace, with its gardens that grew bioluminescent flowers. The war, the cost, the things they'd lost that they were only beginning to count. They will torture me, she said quietly. Yes. How do I? She stopped. The question felt childish, but she asked it anyway. How do I survive it? Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, stripped of its usual sardonic edge. You find something to hold on to. Something real. A memory, a person, a promise you made yourself. And when the pain comes, you go there instead. You leave your body behind, and you live in that place until it's over. What do you hold on to? He didn't answer immediately. His hand moved. Slowly. Painfully. Until it rested beside hers on the frozen stone. Not touching, but close. I used to think about Montana, the mountains at sunrise. A pause. Now I think about escape routes and prison layouts and a Vel'kari princess who plans like a general and laughs at stupid jokes. Seri felt something shift in her chest. Something warm in this frozen place. That is not very romantic, she said. It's not meant to be. It's meant to keep me alive long enough to see you build that empire you keep talking about. She'd told him that on the third night, delirious with pain and cold, her real plan, the one she'd never spoken aloud. Not just to escape. Not just to survive. But to return to her systems, gather what remained of her people, and build something new from the ashes. An empire that could never be conquered because it was held together by loyalty rather than fear. She'd expected him to laugh. He hadn't. You believed me, she said now. When I told you, you believe it. That's enough. He finally looked at her, and his battered face was serious. I've followed a lot of commanders in my life, Seri. Most of them were fighting for their own glory, their own fear, their own politics. You're the first one I've met who's fighting for something bigger than herself. I'm not a commander. I'm a princess who has never held a weapon. Weapons are easy. Anyone can learn to kill. He held up his ruined hands, still healing from the interrogation. But making people want to follow you? Making them believe in something worth dying for? That's rare. That's what you have. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The guards. They both went still, listening. Usually the footsteps passed. Usually, the inspection was cursory. A glance through the grate, a muttered curse about the cold. This time, the door opened. 3 Veth'kai guards stepped in, their scaled faces unreadable. One of them pointed at Seri. You. Come. She felt Elias tense beside her. Without looking at him, she placed her hand over his, just for a moment, and stood. Remember what I said, he called after her, his voice rough. Find something to hold on to. She looked back at him once. This broken, stubborn man who had taught her more in days than her tutors had taught in years. This soldier who had every reason to give up and hadn't. I will, she said. And then the door closed, and she walked toward the pane. They brought her back 12 hours later. Elias was waiting. He spent the time pacing, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, until his knee gave out, and then he'd spend it sitting perfectly still, counting his own heartbeats, trying not to think about what was happening 2 levels up. When the door opened, he didn't recognize her at first. The Veth'kai had been thorough. Her face was swollen, her hands were burned, and she moved like someone who had learned new definitions for pain. But she was walking, on her own feet, with her head level. "Seri, I told them about our escape route," she said, her voice raw but steady. "The one through the waste processing system." He understood immediately. They'd prepared for this, the Veth'kai, a route that seemed real but led to a dead end. A sacrifice to protect the real plan. And the other one? Safe. She made it to their corner and collapsed beside him, breathing hard. "They believed me. They think they're clever." He looked at her. This princess, who had never held a weapon, who had walked into torture and walked out with the real plan intact. "You did well," he said quietly. She laughed. A broken sound, nothing like the laugh from before. "I screamed. I begged. She stopped, and he saw her jaw tighten. "I was weak. You were human. I'm not human. Close enough." He shifted, opening his arms slightly. "An offer, not a demand." Lesson 12. Surviving doesn't mean not breaking. It means putting yourself back together afterward. She hesitated. Then slowly she leaned into him, not quite an embrace, but close. He could feel her shaking. "I held on to something," she whispered against his shoulder. "Like you said, Montana?" "No." A pause, so long he thought she might not continue. "I thought about what you said, about believing in me. I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought that I couldn't die here because someone needed to see what I would become. Someone needed to know if I could do it." Elias closed his eyes. His arms tightened around her, gently, mindful of the injuries. "Then don't disappoint me," he said. "I won't." They sat like that for a long time, two broken people holding each other together in the dark. Not romantics, he'd meant that when he said it. Something else. Something neither of them had words for yet. Finally, Seri pulled back. Her face was still a ruin, but her eyes were clear. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow? The escape?" "The real route. I memorized their patrol changes while they were—" She stopped, steadied herself, "while they were interrogating me. There's a gap. 3 minutes long, starting at 0400 local time. If we move fast, you're in no condition. I don't care." Her voice was steel. "I spent 12 hours in that room thinking about everything I would do when I got out. I am not spending one more night in this cell." Elias looked at her. At the burns, the bruises, the fierce determination that no amount of pain could extinguish. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow. You're not going to argue? Would it matter if I did?" For the first time since they'd brought her back, something like a smile crossed her face. "No. Then I'll save my energy for running." He held out his hand. "Partners?" She took it. Her grip was weak, her fingers damaged, but the strength behind it was unmistakable. "Partners," she said. The real escape route went through the fusion core's cooling system. Elias had nearly laughed when Seri first explained it. Crawling through pipes filled with chemical coolant, past radiation barriers that could fry an unshielded human in seconds, using the core's magnetic field fluctuations as cover for their biosigns. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of plan that made you either a legend or a footnote. Now, 12 hours later, covered in chemical burns and crawling through a service duct barely wide enough for his shoulders, Elias was finding a new appreciation for Seri's particular brand of madness. Left junction ahead, her voice came through the stolen comlink. She was 10 meters behind him, smaller and slower but grimly determined. "There should be a maintenance access panel. I see it." He wrenched the panel free, revealing a vertical shaft that dropped into darkness. According to Seri's mental map, it connected to the vehicle hangar. According to common sense, it connected to a broken neck. "The ladder rungs are spaced for Veth'kai physiology," she said. "Longer than human standard. Be careful. Now you tell me." He went first. Always first. That had become their pattern without either of them acknowledging it. Elias in front to take the hits, Seri behind to plan the next move. It worked. Against all logic, it worked. The shaft was cold, the rungs slick with moisture. Twice he nearly lost his grip. Twice he caught himself and kept climbing down. Behind him, he heard Seri's labored breathing. Her injuries were slowing her down, but she hadn't complained once. Hadn't asked to rest. Hadn't done anything except move forward, one agonizing step at a time. "You're bleeding," he said when they reached the bottom. "I know. We should keep moving." Her voice was flat. Final. "We can worry about bleeding when we're not inside an enemy fortress." He wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her that pushing too hard would kill her just as surely as a Veth'kai bullet. But he'd learned over the past days that arguing with Seri was like arguing with a natural disaster. Technically possible, practically pointless. "The hangar is through here," she said, pressing her hand against a control panel. Her stolen access codes, extracted during the interrogation, though she hadn't told him the details, worked. The door slid open. The hangar was enormous. Veth'kai assault craft lined the floor in neat rows, their predatory shapes gleaming under harsh lights. Guards patrolled in pairs, following the patterns Seri had memorized. 30 seconds until the next patrol passes the northwest corner," she whispered. "That's our window. Which ship?" "The small transport at the far end. It's fueled and ready. I heard the guards complaining about an inspection flight tomorrow." Across 80 meters of open hangar. Yes. Elias closed his eyes. 80 meters. 30 seconds. One injured human, one barely standing Vel'kari princess. Suicide odds. But they'd already beaten worse. "Go," he said. They ran. The first 40 meters went smoothly. They stayed low, used the ships for cover, moved in the gaps between light sources. Elias's knees screamed with every step. He ignored it. Seri struggled to keep pace. She didn't slow down. Then the alarm went off. Red lights flooded the hangar. Klaxons howled. And from every direction, Veth'kai guards came running. "They found the bodies," Seri gasped. "The guards they've been forced to kill on the way here. We have minutes at best. Then we take one of the closer ships. They won't be fueled. They'll have weapons." Elias was already changing course, angling toward a heavy assault craft nearby. "New plan. We take that one, cause as much damage as possible, and hope the chaos gives us a window." "That's not a plan. That's a last stand." "Got a better idea?" She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Yes. Get me to the control tower." "What?" "The control tower." She was pointing at a raised platform at the far end of the hangar, bristling with communications equipment. "I can trigger a system-wide lockdown. Seal the blast doors, vent the atmosphere in specific sections, give us time to reach the fueled transport." "You can do that? I told you." "I memorized the layout. I know their systems." A pause, and he saw something fierce in her eyes. Something that hadn't been there when they'd first met. "I wasn't always just a symbol, Elias. I was being trained to lead. That includes knowing how to break things." He didn't hesitate. "Show me the way." They changed direction, fighting through the chaos. The guards hadn't spotted them yet. Too many alarms, too much confusion. But it was only a matter of time. 30 meters to the tower. 20. 10 to 2. And then, a Veth'kai soldier stepped directly into their path. He was huge, nearly 8 feet tall, scaled and muscular, with a weapon that could punch through ship armor. His eyes narrowed as he saw them. Elias moved without thinking. Later, he wouldn't remember the details. Just snapshots, ducking under the first shot, feeling the heat sear past his cheek. Getting inside the soldier's guard, using his smaller size as an advantage. The knife, stolen from a dead guard miles back, finding the gap in the armor at the throat. The Veth'kai fell. Elias stood over him, breathing hard, his hands covered in alien blood. "Go," he said to Seri. "Tower, now day." She stared at him for one frozen moment. Then she ran. He watched her climb the access ladder, too slow, far too slow, but she made it. Made it to the top, to the control panel, and he saw her hands flying across the interface. The blast doors started closing. Atmosphere began venting from the far sections. Guards screamed as emergency bulkheads trapped them in isolated pockets. And through it all, More soldiers kept coming. Toward Elias. Toward the only target they could still reach. "Seri!" he shouted. "Get to the ship, I'll hold them here." "What?" "No, that's an order." The words came out harder than he intended. He saw her flinch, even from this distance. But she didn't argue. Instead, she did something unexpected. Something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. She looked at him across the chaos, across the guards and the alarms and the closing blast doors, and said clear and calm through the comlink, "I'm not leaving without you. Hold for 2 minutes. I have another plan." Then she disappeared from the tower. 2 minutes, against an army. Elias laughed, that rusty, unused sound again, and raised his stolen weapon. "Come on then," he said to the approaching horde. "Let's see what you've got." The next 2 minutes were the longest of his life. He fought like he hadn't fought in years. Like he had something to live for. Every shot counted. Every move was precise. The training he'd tried to forget came flooding back, and he became what the Veth'kai had always feared. Not just a soldier, but a force of nature. But there were too many of them. When the first shot hit him, his shoulder, spinning him halfway around, he kept fighting. When the second shot hit him, his leg dropping him to one knee, he kept fighting. When the third shot was coming, he closed his eyes and thought of Montana. Of mountains at sunrise. Of a princess with amber eyes who planned like a general and laughed at stupid jokes. And then the fueled transport crashed through the hangar wall. It was inelegant. It was violent. It scattered Veth'kai guards like leaves in a storm and slammed to a halt 10 meters from Elias's position. The hatch opened. Seri stood in the doorway, blood on her face, fire in her eyes, and a ship's weapon system aimed at the remaining guards. "Get in," she said. "Now." He got in. Behind them, the Veth'kai scrambled to respond. Ahead of them, more assault craft were powering up. Around them, everything was explosions and chaos and impossible odds. Seri punched the controls. The transport shot forward, slamming through the hangar doors, climbing toward open sky. "You're insane," Elias gasped from the floor, bleeding from 3 different wounds. "You flew a ship through a building. You told me to get to the ship." Her voice was shaking, with fear, with exhaustion, with something that might have been triumph. "You didn't specify how." He started laughing. He couldn't help it. The pain, the relief, the sheer absurdity of it all. It came out in a broken wheeze that might have been sobs if he'd let it. "You came back for me," he said. "Course I did." She turned to look at him then, this princess who had never held a weapon, who had learned to kill and fly and break things in a freezing cell. "You taught me that pain is temporary. That weakness is fatal. That planning keeps you alive. Yeah? You forgot to mention that caring about someone is also a liability." Her voice cracked. "But I find I don't mind." He looked up at her, at this impossible girl who had dragged him back from the edge of giving up. "Neither do I," he said. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, the pursuing ships opened fire, and there was no more time for talking. 3 years later, the Vel'kari Empire burned with new life. Elias stood on the balcony of the Imperial Palace, a term that made Seri wince every time someone used it, and watched ships arriving for the summit. Representatives from 12 systems. Ambassadors from former enemies. Even a human delegation, small but significant. All of them coming to see the Empress who had built an empire from ashes. "You're brooding." He turned. Seri was standing in the doorway, dressed in the simple gray she preferred to royal finery. She'd grown into her authority over the years, but she'd never adopted the trappings of it. "Emperors who wear crowns," she'd told him once, "are emperors who care more about being seen than being effective." "Not brooding," he said. "Remembering? The cell? The escape? You flying that ship through a building?" Her mouth curved. "One of my better moments." She joined him at the railing, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Not romantics. They'd established that long ago, in quiet conversations during the long months of recovery. What they had was something else. Something rarer. "The human ambassador asked about you," Seri said. "She wants to know if you'd consider returning. Apparently you've become something of a legend back home. The soldier who trained an empress. I didn't train you. I just reminded you what you already were. You gave me courage when I had none. You showed me how to transform fear into action. She looked at him sideways, her amber eyes warm. In my culture, that's called being a soul keeper. Someone who holds the pieces of another person together until they're strong enough to hold themselves. And what am I now? Since you're clearly strong enough, now you're my partner, my advisor, my friend. A pause. The person who still can't admit he's proud of what we built. Elias was quiet for a moment. Below them, the palace grounds bustled with activity. Delegates arriving, servants preparing, soldiers drilling in formations that mixed Vel'kari and human techniques. All of it had grown from a promise made in a frozen cell. I'm proud, he finally said. But I'm also terrified. Of what? Of what happens when I'm not here anymore. He held up his hand, forestalling her objection. I'm getting old, Seri. The injuries from the cell, the escape, the campaign. I don't have forever. None of us do. You have longer than me. Vel'kari lifespans are not relevant. Her voice sharpened. I have told you this before. I do not want forever. I want the time we have. I want to know that the person who taught me to survive is still beside me, for as long as that lasts. He looked at her. This empress, this legend, this girl who had once shivered in chains 3 sizes too large. When did you get so wise, he asked. I had a good teacher. Before he could respond, a chime sounded. The summit was beginning. Seri straightened, her expression shifting into the careful neutrality she used for diplomacy. But before she moved away, she reached out and gripped his hand. Just for a moment. Lesson 1, she said quietly. Hope is a liability. Plan instead. He blinked. It was what he'd told her in the cell years ago. The first lesson. You remember that? I remember everything you taught me. She released his hand. But I've also learned something you didn't teach. Something I had to figure out myself. What's that? She smiled. The real smile. The one she showed almost no one. Hope isn't a liability if you're willing to fight for it. If you plan and prepare and refuse to give up, hope becomes something else. She paused. It becomes a weapon. The summit lasted 3 days. On the first day, Seri negotiated a mutual defense treaty with the Human Federation, the first formal alliance between their species. Elias stood behind her throne, watching the human delegates react to her quiet authority. He saw their surprise shift to respect as she outmaneuvered them on 3 separate provisions while making them feel like they'd won. On the second day, a delegation of Veth'kai arrived. The chamber went silent. The Veth'kai had been beaten, their empire shattered, but remnants still held power in the outer systems. No one had expected them to come. No one had expected Seri to allow it. Elias's hand went to his weapon. Old instincts hard to shake. But Seri stopped him with a glance. Then she stepped down from her throne, a calculated break with protocol, and walked to meet the Veth'kai leader directly. You tortured me, she said, her voice carrying through the silent chamber. Your people killed my family. You left me to freeze in a cell, hoping I would die. The Veth'kai leader, an old soldier, by the look of him, held her gaze. Yes, and now you're here. In my palace. Asking for terms. Yes. Seri was quiet for a long moment. Elias watched her face, looking for the fury he knew was there. The memories of the cell, the interrogation, the screams she still had nightmares about. He saw something else instead. My human advisor taught me something years ago, Seri said. He told me that pain is information. That suffering teaches us who we are. She stepped closer to the Veth'kai, close enough to see every scale on his weathered face. What I learned in your prison is that hatred is easy. Revenge is easy. Building something better, that's hard. You would offer us peace? I would offer you a choice. Her voice was steel. Join us. Not as conquerors, not as subjects, but as partners in something new. Or return to your dying systems and wait for the end. The chamber held its breath. Elias watched, heart pounding. As the Veth'kai leader looked at this girl, this empress, who had every reason to destroy him, and was instead offering salvation. "Why?" the Veth'kai finally asked. Seri smiled. It was not a kind smile, but it was honest. "Because I want my legacy to be an empire that could not be broken. Not by invasion, not by hatred, not even by the desire for vengeance." She glanced back at Elias, just for a moment, and her smile softened. "I was taught by someone who could have given up 100 times. Who could have let the cold and the pain turn him into a monster? He didn't. He chose to be something else." She turned back to the Veth'kai. "I'm offering you the same choice." On the third day after the treaties were signed and the delegations departed, Elias found Seri alone in the garden. She was sitting on a bench beneath a tree that grew bioluminescent flowers, the same species she described to him in the cell years ago. Her eyes were closed, her face tilted toward the light. "You're not sleeping," he said. "Neither are you." He sat beside her. The garden was quiet, the palace still. For a moment, it could have been just the two of them again. No empire, no treaties, no weight of history. Just a soldier and a princess who had learned to survive together. "I've been thinking about what you said," Seri murmured. "About not being here forever." "Seri, let me finish." She opened her eyes. "When we escaped that cell, I told you I wanted to build an empire. You asked me why, and I said it was because I refused to let my family's death mean nothing. I remember. That was a lie. Or not a lie. An incomplete truth." She turned to face him. "The real reason I wanted to build something was because of you." "Me? You were the first person who looked at me. Actually looked at me. And saw something worth believing in. Not a princess, not a symbol, not a political asset. Just me. A girl with wild plans and broken ribs." Her voice wavered slightly. "You made me want to become someone worthy of that faith." Elias was quiet. He didn't know what to say. Didn't know if there were words for the feeling in his chest. "You asked once what you are to me," Seri continued. "I called you my partner, my advisor, my friend." She reached out and took his hand. "But the truth is simpler than that. You're the reason I'm here. You're the reason any of this exists. Every treaty, every alliance, every life saved. It all traces back to a frozen cell and a stubborn human who refused to let me give up. I didn't do anything. You taught me to be brave." Her grip tightened, not fearless. "Brave. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. It's choosing hope over despair, planning over surrender, love over hate." "Love?" The word came out rough. Not romantic love. Something older, deeper. She smiled, and her eyes were bright. "In my language there's a word for it. Keveth. It means the bond between souls who have survived something together, who have been broken and rebuilt side by side." Elias looked at her. At this empress, this legend, this girl who had taught him just as much as he'd taught her. "I don't know that word," he said. "No, but you know the feeling." He did. He'd known it since the cell. Since she'd crawled across frozen stone to let him bind her broken ribs. Since she'd looked at impossible odds and called them a puzzle. "Keveth," he repeated. "Keveth." She leaned against his shoulder. Not quite an embrace, but close. The same way they'd sat in the cell years ago. "You gave me courage, Elias. Let me spend the rest of our time together trying to repay that." He closed his eyes. The garden was warm. The flowers were glowing. And for the first time in years, Elias Vance felt something like peace. "You don't have to repay anything," he said. "I know. I want to." "Why?" She laughed. That sound he'd first heard in a frozen cell, transformed now into something bright and free. "Because you're my Keveth. Because you held my courage when I couldn't hold it myself. Because..." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. "Because I want you to know that it mattered. Everything you did. Everything you survived. It mattered. Elias opened his eyes. He looked at the garden, at the palace, at the empire stretching beyond, at everything that had grown from a promise made in chains. I know, he said. I always knew. And sitting there, under trees that glowed with impossible light, two survivors who had become something more watched the future they built together unfold before them. Not romantic, not tragic, not heroic, just real, just Keveth, just enough.